Hello, everybody.
Hello, Ken.
Good to see Dr. Ricks, and Dave is back last week. He had the week off last week, and we are having this is episode 226 of Line Upon Line. This week we're going to take off with part two of our Christmas discussion from last week. So if you would start us out, Dr. Ricks, that would be wonderful.
Now, I want you to think of Peanuts, the Charles Schulz cartoon. There is Charlie Brown and Lucy, and they're walking away from a Santa Claus here little exit from the Santa Claus thing. And Lucy says, "Well, did you tell Santa what you wanted for Christmas?" And he says, "Sure. I also wished him a very happy Hanukkah." And then he further says, "We didn't have much time, but we had a really good discussion of Hanukkah, the Maccabean Revolution, and the cleansing of the temple." And of course, that's kind of impressive. Charlie Brown walks away and he's saying, "It's not often that you find a Santa Claus who's interested in religion." In my own small way, that's kind of how we look at Christmas these days. They don't put much religion in there. Anyway, we're going to talk about the hollowness of it. This is called The Preacher and the Friendly Ghost. This preacher moves into a town and he's looking for a house to rent. The only place available, he said, "Don't get it. They've got a ghost in that house. It's haunted." He said, "I don't believe in ghosts." So he rents the house. Sure enough, there is a ghost. The ghost walks up to him and says, "Boo." And he's not frightened. They talk. And he tells people in town, "There really is a ghost in my house." Some others say, "We don't believe it. You're just saying it." So he tells the ghost, "Let me take your picture so I can show it to the people in the congregation that you really do exist. And you're not that scary looking." The ghost says, "Okay," takes out his camera flash. He gets a picture. And then he looks at it and he says, "Hey, you're not on the picture." The ghost stopped for a minute and replied, "Well, I guess the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak." Now, this joke is for those of you who love big government, like the big blue machine that runs Chicago and other places. 3 contractors are bidding on a fixed broken fence at the White House. One's from Chicago, one from Tennessee, and one from Minnesota. All 3 go to the person in charge of this. Minnesota contractor takes out tape measures and other things. He measures the fence and he says, "Well, the job will run $900 plus $400 for materials, plus $400 for my crew, and $100 profit for me." Guy from Tennessee says, he measures it. He says, "My job will take $700, $300 for material, $300 for my crew, and $100 profit for me." The Chicago contractor says, "It'll cost 20. He whispers to the guy in charge, "It will cost $2,700. The guy whispers back. He said, "Well, you didn't even measure. Why is it going to cost more than the others?" He says, "Well, here's what my plan will be. $1,000 for me, $1,000 for you, and we'll hire the guy from Tennessee to fix it."
There's more truth in that than you know.
Yeah, a lot of that. And he says, this is what we call the Chi-Town government stimulus plan. Chi-Town. Yeah, did I say Chi-Town? Yeah, government stimulus program. There's a lot of that goes on in the Chi-Town.
Trust me, it's exactly the way it works over there.
And probably a lot of other places. Okay, part 2 of the vast Christmas conspiracy. The Christmas obscures the wonderful story of Jesus's immaculate birth and all the details around it, because Christmas is surrounded by a decadent spirit. And what I would argue is that we do need to spend time reading about Mary and Elizabeth and John the Baptist and Joseph and other people that are around the Christmas story and some of the miraculous things. But Christmas time is one of the worst times of the year to consider it, because the spirit of Christmas kind of obscures the Bible aspect of it, and you miss some of the connections. I want to read this quote from a famous writer. He's a nominal Christian, very famous writer. He wrote this in 2003. He said he wondered if keeping Christmas was worth it anymore. He felt, he's an older man, that it had become more and more a road show for reindeer, winter scenes, elves, and the God substitute, Santa Claus. Santa serves as a front for merchants seeking to play on the guilt of parents bear for ignoring their children all year long by buying them a bunch of gifts. It certainly overwhelms anyone who tries to focus on the real story of Jesus Christ and his birth. He feels that the great question is why participate in Christmas that has shifted, now these are his words, from the babe in the manger to the babe in the Victoria's Secret's window. People will shop until they drop, and some on Black Friday violently drop others in the shopping frenzy. By the way, have we heard much of the Black Friday riotous behavior this year?
Not so much this year. The stores are all taking have to take extra efforts with security and that, so because they don't want to get on the news to be the store that allowed that to happen. So they're doing a better job of preventing that. But they have to hire security, and they have to take different means and how they let people in the door, and so.
Yeah, I only heard. Go ahead, Kent. I'm Dave.
I think it was Fox News this morning had a segment on this time of year. Try not to make eye contact with people, prolonged eye contact, and get upset, don't do any hand gestures or show any overt whatever, because the amount of alcohol and drug use goes up and other things, so people tend to become more violent and more emotional. And so the holiday that the so-called Christians keep seems to come with a lot of problems.
I only heard of one big incident of violence on Black Friday. There probably was more than one, but only one that I heard about. So I guess that is an improvement of past years. And I think they are trying to get smarter on security, how to string the public out so they don't all come in at once, I guess, or something like that. Also, I guess in all fairness to the stores, a smart thing is, I'm not saying it's a spiritual thing, they started earlier and they string the time out when people arrive. Some stores, but not name the store because I could be wrong, stayed open the entire day of Thanksgiving, and others start earlier and earlier. So you spread out the rush of people. And one store is, I guess from a few days ago, is going to stay open 24/7 all the way to Christmas Eve.
I had a guy call me last Easter, and he said, "Dave, I'm in a spot. Can you help me out?" And I said, "Maybe." He goes, "I need somebody to be armed security at the Honey Baked Ham store from Friday night and Saturday. We're going to pay you very well because the people are stealing the hams for Easter. We're going to pay you very well, and we're going to give you a free ham." And I said, "I don't know where to begin."
Everything about that is a no.
Friday night and Saturday, and to keep the Christians from stealing the Christian ham, the Easter ham, and then when
in honor of
ham.
Jesus, right?
Right. Well, they set up in my parking lot. They set up a big nativity scene where you can get your picture with Santa Claus and elves, and you can also do a petting zoo. And they have they've got the elves, and they have a little pony, and they've got some goats and sheep, and some huge rabbits, and a couple of big like Canadian geese, and a pig. And I put on Facebook, there's no way Jesus was born in a house that had a pig in it. Just
wow.
Think about
if you know anything about Judaism, they were not. Interesting though, a petting zoo. I guess I haven't been observing. I haven't seen a petting zoo for Christmas. I guess it's out there and I just hadn't noticed it.
Yeah, it's in front of the Tractor Supply store.
That's interesting. Well, you can see what I mean by distractions from the real story of Christ's birth. Um, what we have is a spirit of enormous, somewhat out of control consumerism and greed that dominates the holiday season. So people are saying, well, why should I not keep Christmas, worship the birth and other things of Christ at other times of the year? That's one. And I mentioned earlier, I think that half the employers now are limiting or outlawing alcohol at Christmas office parties because now we're in an atmosphere where there are a lot more things that can go wrong, with men and women in the workplace. But the true Bible story of Jesus Christ's birth and its heroes and heroines, you rarely hear about. Now, I was going to say this today, and I want to just qualify. We've been traveling a lot the last 5-6 days and listening to Christian radio and other things. I did hear one man speak, and he did talk a little bit about Mary, and he mentioned John the Baptist very briefly, but talked a little bit about Mary. So I will admit there are some people who do bring in a little Bible this time of year.
Yeah, I've got a family, and what they do is they get up Christmas morning, and then they read some scriptures, and then they have breakfast, and then they open their prizes, presents, whatever it's called, and they do try to do that. But when I try talking with them like about the history of it or whatever, they go, "But that's not why we do it." And that's why there is a spirit in keeping the holy days, and there's a spirit in not keeping the holy days. And God likens this to adultery.
Mm-hmm.
And it says play in the harlot, and that's what that is. Even my doctor that I go to, he says, "Oh, Christmas is evil," and he gives me the whole history of it. And I was up there today, and people were saying Merry Christmas, and he was saying it back to them.
But he knows the history.
Oh, he knows Scripture. I mean, he knows the truth. He just doesn't seem to want to act on it.
I guess a lot of people don't care. Well, the scripture that we put up first this evening has to do with the part of the story of Christ's birth that you hear very little about. I guess some people do talk about it, but very little about it. Would you go ahead and read it, Ken?
Sure thing. Luke 1:26. Now in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. Now the time that Elizabeth should give birth was fulfilled, and she brought forth a son. Her neighbors and her relatives heard that the Lord had magnified his mercy towards her, and they rejoiced with her. He asked for a writing tablet and wrote, "His name is John." They all marveled. His mouth was opened immediately, and his tongue freed, and he spoke, blessing God. Fear came all who lived around them, and all these sayings were talked about throughout all the hill country of Judea. All who heard them laid them in their hearts, saying, "What then will this child be?" The hand of the Lord was with him. His father Zacharias was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, for he has visited and worked redemption for his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David."
In other words, Christ came with a story. It started with Zachariah the priest and his wife Elizabeth, that both John the Baptist and Jesus Christ were going to be born and be part of liberating Israel and the whole world and doing great things. From their birth, that story was known. Also, part of the story that's of interest is when Mary visited Elizabeth. I think we mentioned it before, but I want to mention it again because it's a good part of the story. It's like the baby John the Baptist recognized the baby Jesus Christ in utero. Both babies were in their mothers, but they started dancing in joy, John the Baptist meeting the Messiah, which proves that the kids were individuals even inside their mother's baby. They were fetuses, were real human individuals inside their mother's wombs. Hope I said that correctly, so no one misunderstands me. They were real individuals, not just tissue to be torn out. So part of the birth of Christ is the miraculous birth of the prophet who had come before him, John the Baptist, because his parents were too old to have children, so like Abraham and Sarah. And God did a miracle to make John the Baptist a special person. By the way, you'll notice a pattern in the Bible that when God wants to make a prophet special, their parents can't have any children until late in life. Then by miracle, they have that baby. And being older parents, they're better parents. And having that one child be so special to them, that child, well, you'll see it with Samuel, Hannah, and Samuel the prophet, of course, Abraham and Isaac and Sarah. And you'll see that pattern in the Bible. Same with John the Baptist, was to be a special prophet before Christ. And of course, Christ obviously had the Immaculate Conception, special birth. And I just say, how many people hear that story on Christmas? I bet you less than 5%. What do you bet?
Well, probably less than that.
I would say, yeah, much less than that.
And as we mentioned last time, just for people to know it, that John the Baptist's father was in the course of Abijah. That's his priesthood. So it would have ended about July 1st or possibly a few days before that. And he was born July. So if he was impregnated July 1st, given a few days, he would have been born in the spring. And if Christ, and he had a 6-month head start on Christ, and that would end up putting Christ in the fall. And that's what most scholars believe, the church believe, that Christ was born in the fall, probably on one of the fall holy days like trumpets or the Feast of Tabernacles. Because it's almost as if the Bible is about the first and second coming of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and you know what comes to mind real quick? It's also this story puts to rest the Trinity. We don't have the verse up here, I don't believe, but it talks about how the Spirit of God goes into Mary, and that is what is used to create Christ, to fertilize Mary. If there was a Trinity, then Christ would be praying to the Holy Spirit, not to his Father, God. It's just another part of the story that people miss, and they just kind of gloss over, and they forget that that's what the Bible actually states.
And I think a good way to think of the Holy Spirit as an extension of God's power. It's a unique and intelligent and powerful extension of his power, but it's part of God's power. So God used his Spirit to impregnate Mary when she probably was only 15 years old or something like that. And that's a great story, the Immaculate Conception. Actually, that was in the movie Star Wars too, but don't sweat it. People wonder, because I think there's a false religious component to science fiction. Not that it bothers me. I just think you might want to be aware of it.
They pull a lot of science fiction, or fiction in general, pull things from the Bible all the time, and they twist it and make it fit their narrative.
I mean, Darth Vader, supposedly, according to the story, was an Immaculate Conception, and at least up to this point. Now, maybe as they add more Star Wars movies on, it'll change. But the whole point of the book and the movie, original movies, were the birth, fall, and then last-minute salvation of Darth Vader. There's a Bible theme there somewhere, the rise and fall of mankind. And as I say, you realize that this is science fiction, but I think they do sometimes get ideas from the Bible.
Absolutely. My dad recognized it when he saw the movie back in '77. He recognized it when he watched it. I mean, there was so much of a biblical theme throughout the movie that it was easy to see.
And when they say the force be with you, you almost think of someone saying, God be with you. And I realize Hollywood and modern day world does not believe in an intelligent creator or God. I mean, they all believe in evolution. It's almost as if the material world is a God in itself and has its own mind and its own force, which is not true. But that is the power of God that we're looking at, and not the power of nature. But you see how it's like God, false God, but they're similar.
Yep. No, it's definitely written in there for that reason.
I never saw the movie.
Yeah, I know. You're proud of that. Sure.
Very proud of that. I actually paid to see it. Guy went in and said, I can't stomach this, and walked out, asked my money back.
Well, what can I say? When you have little boys, that's a big thing. Having had little boys at that time, that's a big thing. So plus I don't mind science fiction. If you understand what the writers are doing, you don't get deceived by it. It's like a lot of entertainment, the writers are pushing worldly secular narratives. If you're aware of it, you can avoid being brainwashed. But I think a lot of people don't even realize that, like Dr. Goebbels said, the best propaganda is put in entertainment. People don't even know they're being propagandized.
Yep, absolutely.
What our kids know about the Bible, other than what idiots tell them, is when they go to watch a movie that's based on the Bible, they claim, that has nothing to do with the truth.
Yep.
Like that.
How often have you ever seen a Bible movie not leave you feeling icky, or somehow it missed the point?
Once. I saw when they didn't. 10 Commandments.
Same here. 10 Commandments.
Yep, 10 Commandments is probably because you can everything wasn't that movie, everything Christ said was directly from the Bible.
Yes.
They used his quotes, yeah.
Yeah. But it's rare for Hollywood to get, well, let's say their religious ideas out of the way, to look at the Bible and write a movie straight from the Bible.
When that movie came out, more people read the Bible than they do today. And so if somebody would have fudged it somewhere, it would have been a flop.
Yeah. It was like 90-some% accurate. And what was different, and I think it was 1957 when they made the 10 Commandments, Hollywood was 100% supportive. All the best actors, like Yul Brynner played Pharaoh, and the main villain in all the Hollywood movies played the villain in the 10 Commandments. What was his name, honey?
You talking Darth Vader?
No, in the 10 Commandments.
Oh.
Dathan.
Dathan and Amira.
And Dathan was played by Edward G. Robinson, the number one villain.
Boy, did he do a good job at that, or what?
And boy, he gave you that evil, sneaky feeling of Dathan, the guy that undermined Moses. But Hollywood wouldn't do that now. Religious movie would be hard pressed to get even one major star to play it, if that.
Well, they remade one they called The Exodus or something like that a couple of years ago. And after the movie, the guy that played Moses called Moses all kinds of horrible names. And I had a man call me up. They said, I don't want a sermon, but Moses, good guy, bad guy. And this guy's older than I am. I said, he was a really good guy. He's a really, really great guy. He says, well, the actor, I can't understand. The actor says he was a psychopath and a homophobe and all these things. And I said, well, the actor's an idiot. Because Moses, Jesus Christ quotes Moses, and he says, unless you become as good as Moses and the apostles, Moses and the prophets. And much of the time he named Moses specifically.
Just look at entertainment, everything today, mostly about Christmas. There's really very, very, very little Bible in there. And if you look at the Bible, wouldn't you expect to find Christmas mentioned, at least indirectly or alluded to once? I mean, if Christmas was the big celebration during the days of the apostles, wouldn't you think it would be alluded to at least once?
Yep. Never mentioned.
And it's not, even not indirectly, like, well, we'll be there by Christmas, or let's have a happy Christmas. It's never mentioned in the Bible.
Even when Christ was 17, 18, 20 years, 30 years old, he starts his birthday and the apostles gather together on Christmas to prepare for this. That didn't happen. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm 30 years old. Hey guys, it's my birthday. We should get together and the disciples are going to come together and bring in gifts on his birthday. That didn't happen.
Look at the days that were kept. Here's one that was kept and mentioned in the New Testament.
Oh, was that my cue? Am I slipping?
Yes, sir. Kent's going to read this for us.
All right, 1 Corinthians 5:6. Your boasting is not good. Don't you know that a little yeast leavens the whole lump? Purge out the old yeast that you may be a new lump, even as you are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, has been sacrificed in our place. Therefore, let us keep the feast not with old yeast, neither with the yeast of malice or wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth.
Now, leave that up for a minute. If you're being academically honest, when Paul says, therefore, let us keep the feast, he's talking to Gentile Christians. The only logical feast you could be referring to is Passover and unleavened bread, right? And Paul says, let us keep it. So that's what they're keeping.
Yes, not Christmas.
Oh, Christmas.
It's not mentioned. By the way, most scholars will admit this. In many of the books, now they call it the primitive church of the first century, or the apostolic church. The primitive church never kept Christmas. It came centuries later. Now, and that's an honest statement, and that's true. But the question is that what God wanted to happen?
Right. It would have been mentioned. It would have been in the Bible. It would have been in one of the books. It would have been a commanded holy day, but it's not.
I didn't want to do it.
And the
In fact,
Passover was the
not mentioned. Probably it's not specifically mentioned, so we won't keep it.
Yeah.
That's right.
And God is not interested in warmed over pagan material. By the way, the number one day to be kept in the Bible is I'll call it the New Covenant, New Testament Passover. You know, it's in John 13 and 14. But look in 1 Corinthians 11. Let's look at the next slide. This is such an important holy day for God that if you don't keep it correctly, well, actually, it leads into unleavened bread. That's the holy day part of it, but it's a lead up to it, commemorating the comradeship of Christ's apostles and his death. If you don't keep it properly, look at the penalties you face.
1 Corinthians 11:26. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Therefore, whoever eats this bread or drinks the Lord's cup in a manner unworthy of the Lord will be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks in an unworthy manner eats and drinks judgment to himself, if he doesn't discern the Lord's body. For this cause many among you are weak and sickly, and not a few sleep.
You know that word sleep is a euphemism.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a euphemism. So we know that's what is important to God, that once a year Passover service where we kind of are with Christ again, like his apostles were in John 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. You can read the whole thing. Christmas is, as we said before, we're talking about hollow religion. Hollow means it's there's a lot of surface, but there's no spiritual depth.
You know, in the Bible, if you miss a holy day, that's a bad thing. You're sick, you can't go. But Passover, there's rules on having to do that properly 30 days later. That's the only one where they put out rules that you have to do it 30 days later and how it's done. And so it's very, very important to God.
As I say, Christmas is not in the New Testament, not even indirectly alluded to. Well, we believe the conspiracy is the devil wants the world to have hollow religion where there's a lot of hoopla, but there's no inner depth, nothing to draw you closer to God. Master of subtle deceit.
Yeah, you know, the Christmas started out, we know, as pagan, and it developed into this quasi-religious holiday that man injected a century or so ago, and which was, like you said, hollow, and it's reverting back to its hollow roots now, which is all commercialism, and you don't see manger scenes like you used to back in the 70s, and you don't see any of that stuff. It's slow. They're pulling God back out of it, or Christ back out of it, which they injected him into it, and it's starting to go back to its pagan roots again.
Well, they are doing the manger scenes more often, but it's two mommies and two daddies.
Yeah, I seen that. There's a
You're
book
kidding
out.
me.
There's
No.
a book out about, yeah.
I haven't seen two mommies and two daddies.
Oh, there's another one out now where Mrs. Claus is actually another man. So
Yes.
feminists should be very upset that the lady got cut out of the story, but
Wow.
Yeah, I heard there was a couple that said that if they ever have a child, they were only going to tell them about, they were only going to expose them to a black Santa Claus. And they said, well, what's our child going to say when they see a white Santa Claus? Well, we're going to tell them that's his husband.
Whoa.
Yes, I heard that this
I
morning.
guess that hits all the politically correct buttons, doesn't it?
It does. It absolutely does.
I know I shouldn't laugh. It's so outrageous, but you gotta laugh. That is cute. I mean, well, by the way, the big battle now it's called the winter solstice or the winter holiday, which is pretty much what it was before the time of Christ. And so a lot of institutions and things have taken Christ out. A lot of stores, happy holiday. There's now a counter reaction to that to try to get Christ back into Christmas. And I have, hope this doesn't sound like I'm wiggling out of something, but my thought is, if we have true freedom of religion in America, Christians have a right to be misguided or be wrong doctrinally. If they want to try to put Christ back in Christmas, they have a right to try. And the secular world saying we won't tolerate Christ in Christmas somehow seems wrong. It's like a double wrong.
Yeah, you get kind of torn when people talk about putting Christ back in Christmas, and you got this battle going on. We're kind of standing outside watching this battle, you know what I mean, between the nominal Christians and the secular world. It's kind of an interesting thing from our perspective to watch that.
Yeah,
it is, and because you kind of don't know how you feel. My son said when somebody says, "Are you Christian?" He goes, "I don't know how to answer them." Because if I say yes, they think I'm like that. And where I am on it is that Christ was never in Christmas to begin with. However, the people who want to put Christ in Christmas and try to, they won't kill me. They won't hurt me. But those others,
right,
they'll hurt you.
Right.
And also, let's say if someone says Merry Christmas and you just say thank you, being mean about Christmas will make them think you're not a Christian. And I don't think we want to send that message either. I know you're going to say, but they might think we believe the same as they do. I understand that's a potential problem. I'd say still you want to let them know we are a Christian. And if ever you can get them in a position where they're willing to discuss the issue of when was Christ really born, then that's the opening you're looking for. But I don't think we should be mean to nominal Christians who at least want to do the right thing as best they know it.
You know, normally it doesn't really come up in conversation when people this time of year always wish you a Merry Christmas. I just tell them enjoy your holiday, and they don't. You know, I'm not going into it with them. But I did have had my teeth cleaned the other day, and the dentist came in after she cleaned them and says, "Well, what are you doing for Christmas? Do you do this? Do you do this?" I said, "I don't do Christmas," and I kind of left it there, and the room got real quiet. He didn't say another word, and the woman cleaning my teeth didn't say another word about it, and we just kind of moved right along.
You heathen, you.
I'll hit them up with some Hebrew or Yiddish. I'll go Baruch Hashem, and they'll go, "What's that?" I go, "Well, that's actually Hebrew. It means God bless you." "Oh, that's neat," and off I go.
What's that word again? Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
It's
that's
H-A,
interesting.
Hashem.
Hmm.
A lot of times people, my Jewish friends will send me messages and they'll sign it with capital B, capital H, just BH.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, is we want to celebrate things that will help us get closer to God, to learn to love God, because that's the goal, is love.
Yes.
Go ahead, Ken.
All right. Mark 12:29. Jesus answered, "The greatest is, hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This is the first commandment. The second is like this. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment than these. And to love with him with all the heart and with all the understanding, with all the soul, with all the strength, and to love his neighbor as himself is more important than the whole burnt offerings and sacrifice."
And we want a religion that helps us learn to love God, not materialism, but love God and love your fellow man. And Christmas, I think, with all the frantic shopping and partying, just kind of obscures that message. Now, there are those who say, what about the message of peace on earth? You do hear that at Christmas sometimes. And that is a laudable theme, peace on earth. However, when the angelic choir that you see in Luke sang peace on earth and all that, and those things, I'm sure it would have been great to have heard that angelic sing to Christ on that night. That would have been a fabulous thing to hear. And God will bring peace on earth. However, let's look at the next two scriptures. We'll see that it's not quite as simple as the world thinks.
All right, Luke 2:14. Glory to God in the highest, on earth peace, goodwill toward men. Matthew 5:44. But I tell you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat you and persecute you, that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? If you only greet your friends, what more do you do than others? Don't even the tax collectors do the same?
So it's clear that Christ came to bring peace on earth. However, it's a little oversimplified. In other words, when we become converts of Christ, we, of course, will become more peaceful, just like the scriptures we read, love your enemy. But here's the reality of Christ bringing peace on earth. Let's bring up the next scripture.
All right, Matthew 10:34. Don't think that I came to send peace on the earth. I didn't come to send peace, but a sword. For I came to set a man at odds against his fathers, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's foes will be those of his own household.
Truth. A lot of people in God's church can testify to the fact that when they came in the church, and I guess it's because their relatives loved them and didn't want them to go off in a different direction, they found they were in a battle with their relatives over this different stuff that you're doing. This is different.
Yeah, I had that issue with pork is where they were going to start, and they read me the verse about all the beasts that was it John, and or Peter and I said, well, keep reading, and it says who the unclean were. It was the Gentiles, and that was the end of that. They never did that again. My dad would just drop hints at cults and things after that point, but that was pretty much the end of it.
You knew too much Bible for him, right?
Yeah. I was new in the church, but I was glad that I had read the booklet, and I just was able to slide right on down and say, if you keep reading, it says what this means. It doesn't say anything about it being pork and, shellfish. It's just people it's talking about, that no one's unclean. And that was the end of it. Shut the book. That was it. I gave them their Bible back, and that was the end of that.
The other part of that is, one, it was a vision, so there was actually nothing unclean there.
Absolutely.
Two, he 70 years after Christ had died, he still had not eaten anything unclean. You think he'd have known by then that he could, and then three, go down the list, you keep reading, and you see that it's about human beings, and that God, the Holy Spirit, can cleanse anything.
Well, plus to know this, he knew that God wasn't trying to tell him that, because if he really thought God was telling him to eat unclean things, he wouldn't have argued. He said, no, I don't do that. And, if that would have angered God, he would have had a different outcome, but it didn't, because he knew that that's not what God meant. He knew that it couldn't be that. He had to wait for the answer, but he knew it couldn't be actually eating unclean things.
And the other thing, too, is you need to read the Bible, if you can, with a Jewish mind, a Jewish way of thinking, because they think in detail. They ask questions to spur thought. That's why they make great lawyers and things. So there's a lesson here. What is this lesson? He's telling me to do something I know that I'm not supposed to do. So where's this going? What's the trick? What's coming in the back door? What's the lesson? And if you start thinking that way, the Bible becomes a lot more open for you.
Right. And he didn't jump straight to, okay, show me the ham. He didn't jump straight to that. He knew better. And that's why you got to read the Bible in context, have some background, and have some nuances of the language and of the times and how things operated. So without all that put into the Bible, because the Bible's written kind of the way it's been interpreted by the English, the New King James, or the King James, in other words, it's written in such a way that it's kind of, what's the word I want to use? Sterile in a way, if you don't understand, because they kind of they want it to sound dramatic the way they put it together. If you don't understand the times and the language and the context, you don't get what they're actually saying at times.
Right. You got to think about who he's talking to, when, why, how, all that. And then you also have to do line upon line, precept upon precept. Where's this word used in the Old Testament? What was that word? What does it mean? Where is it used in the New Testament? What was he talking about when he used this word? And then what precept has got to be upon precept. So in the Old Testament, he said, don't eat these things. And then you go to the New Testament, 70 years after Christ had died, they still had not eaten those things. Probably there's something else going on there.
Right, but if you want it out to be able to eat your ham and your bacon and your shrimp, you're just going to take the first thing you can get, and that's what people do. They don't want to apply precept upon precept, because it doesn't get them out of them surf and turf that they usually eat, But that's what and that's what we're here for, to try and help clear that up. But yeah, you're right. You got to know the background. You got to understand the people, the times, the inflections, or whatever it is that you're reading into it. I'll tell you that the back of Haley had some things wrong, but he has a very good in the back of his Bible handbook of how the Bible was written and kind of the cadence and how it was done. It kind of gives you a little insight of how it ended up the way it is today. So that could be helpful in how you study it. And, it's 2017. The precept upon precept and line upon line is so easy nowadays. Maybe 50 years or 100 years ago, the reference material you would have had to have found or gone to libraries or bought would have been quite extensive. Now you can do this in no time. I mean, you can do it at the church site very simply. You can do it online very simply, as far as studying different interpretations and what's the word for the different what am I trying to think? There's several of them. The Bible software I use lists a ton of different
Translation.
what was that?
Translations, you mean?
Translation, not just translations, but commentaries, Bible commentaries. So much out there. There's no excuse nowadays for not. If you're really serious about it, anyway, there's no excuse for not getting to the gist of something. You can find different PDFs.
On your phone.
You can do it on your phone. You can find
most phones. You can do it on. Yeah.
You can find Bullinger's PDFs out there that you don't even have to buy. That you can find. I mean, all of the booklets from the church you can find at the church website. There's a lot on Apple iBooks that you can just study, and it gives you every reference. There's no real excuse today to not get at the root of the meaning of almost anything that is contained in the Bible. You can do it, and you can do it for next to nothing, and you can do it fairly quickly.
By the way, you can also go to our Midwest website, ICGarea4.com. And it's ICG, all small letters, and the number 4.com. And then we have many articles on all kinds of topics. So most of them are like 3 or 4 pages, direct, easy. But I was thinking about Peter. The one thing Peter knew is that God would not undo one of his laws, because his laws are immutable. So if he said something was unclean, there's no way God's going to contradict his own law. Peter knew that. But as we end this discussion, I think Satan wants to also obscure the fact that the important thing is that Christ came the first time to lay the foundation for our forgiveness and salvation. In other words, spiritually save us, and the second time to come back and physically save the world. And then, of course, straighten everything out and lock Satan up. Let's go to our last scripture.
All right, Matthew 24:21. For then there will be great oppression, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, nor ever will be. Unless those days had been shortened, no flesh would have been saved. But for the sake of the chosen ones, those days will be shortened.
In other words, some great evil empire will come up and oppress people. We know that communism and fascism and some other smaller oppressive states have done bad things. Well, something really, really bad is coming one last time. And we now have weaponry, I think both chemically, biologically, and atomic weapons that could, or a combination thereof, that can end all life on this earth. And if Christ didn't come back at the right moment and stop, we could call it World War III, whatever it is, the war between the king of the north and the south and the east, whatever you want to call it, the world would be poisoned. But Christ will come back and save this world. But instead of people thinking about the first and second coming of Christ, our focus is on the Santa and the shopping frenzy.
And a new phone.
Yeah, and the new phone. And the new phone. And just like John the Baptist came to pave the way for Jesus Christ, the 2 witnesses will come to pave the way for the second coming of Christ. You know, John, the first coming, the 2 witnesses for Christ's second coming.
Yep.
Okay.
We talked about before we go, I want to cover a couple of quick things here with everybody. Here's the ICG, Intercontinental Church of God website. We have, if you want to do some studying on your own, all these booklets and all in PDF form. You can also get a lot of them on the iBook store. And hopefully pretty soon we'll have them on the Amazon Kindle. Also, if you want to go to different, let's see, go down here. We have, where's it at? The Beliefs. There's also all kinds of web sources here for studying the Bible. Also, you mentioned your ICG Area 4. Here's that website. You can go here and you can check on different things as well, as far as sermons and
articles,
publications, articles.
Also, can they see my sermons as well as they can get them on that website? Can they can see some of my latest sermons on the web? Isn't that right?
Correct.
John?
You would go to here, and you would go to, we have two. We have ICG Area 4, and we also have the Intercontinental Church of God, obviously. Where is that?
And that's Carl
Right
Hill
there.
and John Regenbach, in case you wonder who those faces are that you saw on the other website.
We also have Stan and all kinds of special guests that go to the main site down in Tyler. So all available on the web. There is really no excuse not to have plenty of what do you call it, spiritual food to get you where you need to be. We have it. If you don't find it, email us and we will help you find it.
I want to add one more thing. Obviously, it's like having a library at your fingertips, all the new electronic things. However, none of that is a substitute for attending church. If you're able to go to a church meeting, even watching a DVD with a group of like-minded Christians, you get more out of it than watching it at home by yourself. It really is true. Being with the brethren on the Sabbath, you get a certain jolt of spiritual.
There is no substitute for that, none whatsoever. I look forward to it every Sabbath. I do.
Now, on prophecy, there's a prophecy in Zechariah that Jerusalem will be a stone of contention, and a lot of countries will get hurt over that. My first thought is, will America be blessed for supporting Israel regarding Jerusalem?
Absolutely. Until we stop, but absolutely. I think that we're going to be blessed greatly with some of the things that we've done recently. I love it when the United Nations gets all upset over something. It shows you how impotent they are.
When you're standing alone against the world and trying and supporting something that God supports, then yes, I think you can be safe to say that you will see a blessing from that. And like Dave, like you said, as long as we do it until we stop, which who knows how long that will be, 3 years, 7 years, whatever it is, then we may could face some wrath because of that.
By the way, the UN is very anti-Semitic. They've taken votes where almost everybody would vote against Israel, except for the United States. That last year, our government abstained intentionally. We planned to blast Israel. A very serious thing. Actually, 44 nations either abstained or voted with us. While that is a victory for the anti-Semitic crowd, that many countries not voting for an anti-Israel measure is in itself quite amazing.
They want their money cut off.
Yeah. And I honestly believe that moving the embassy right now was not such a bad idea. Last week, one of Iran's proxy armies fired a missile at where the royal family lives in Saudi Arabia. While they all make noise about being upset at the move, because being Muslims, you have to, they really need America. They can't afford to kick us to the road just now. They haven't made that big a fuss over the Jerusalem move. The PLO is always getting upset every now and then. Every 2 or 3 times a year, they have riots over. And I don't see these riots as being worse than the regular ones they have. It's really not, America's not paid any significant price over the whole thing. Yet. I realize we'll have to see the future, but I think America will be blessed.
Well, think about it. They don't want to antagonize us. The president just opened up that whole Alaskan, what's the name of that? In the oil field in Alaska that he just opened up. Anwar,
yeah,
and they
Anwar.
say that has as much oil as the Saudi Arabia. So he always wants to negotiate from a position of leverage. So if we can match them in oil reserves or best them in oil reserves, you don't want to mess with us.
I mean, obviously things could go wrong because we have a lot of liberal courts that'll block a lot of this. It'll be a long struggle. But if America gets all that oil going, and we are legally now from last year, they can export oil, both crude and refined. America's could be not only could we be energy independent, we could be a major exporter of oil like 50, 60 years ago. I really don't think OPEC will ever, well, unless our government changes and we keep the oil underground, will ever be able to control oil prices like they used to. Saudi Arabia is now talking about diversifying their economy. They see the handwriting on the wall.
Yeah, oil's, I mean, price of gas has been flat for about 10, 12 solid months now. I mean, flat. I mean, it hasn't moved much in one direction at all.
I predict, even if the economy heats up, when in the past that would drive oil up to $3 and $4 in California, I believe even if the economy heats up, oil will go up some, but not all that much. I don't think you're going to see $3 and $4 a gallon gas, even if the economy heats up, because if it heats up, it'll be worth it to open up these new oil wells that they have discovered. You might take a few months to adjust, but I really think, obviously, no one can predict the future. Anything bad could happen to upset anything we say. But it would appear with the tax cuts and more oil available in a few years, we should be the strongest economy in the world. We have the natural resources, reasonably good workforce, high tech. You see what I mean? America has all the advantages.
Yep.
And we have an administration that will fight for American jobs.
Yep. Anytime I see the Marxist world unite against something we do, I know we're doing the right thing. Because the whole Marxist, Keynesian economic loving world united against us in not just that, but many things they unite against us in, and that tells me we're doing the right thing.
By the way, I've been told this, that many presidents, because of 95 Congress voted we should move the embassy, and they've reaffirmed that vote every so often in Congress. But every president's been afraid to do it because, the Arab world will explode, the world will come to an end if the Arabs are offended. And every so often the UN would vote against us, and our presidents would threaten to cut off money, and we've never done it. This current president might actually do it.
How much you want to bet he does? I'm thinking, yeah, he's going to do it.
To some of them, at least, it may be a case-by-case thing, depends on circumstances. But for some of those countries, he might cut off a lot of their aid. And I say more power to him.
I'd like to see him cut the aid off to the United Nations.
Cut them down a lot, at least. I mean, we're paying 25% of the expenses.
I would come in there and say, hey, listen, we've been paying more than we're supposed to, so we're not going to pay anything for a few years, and then we'll ease back into it to get everything right, because we've paid ahead now.
You know what they need to do? They need to shut down the UN, kick them all out, sell that to some developer, and move them to Venezuela. You like it?
I thought you were going to say St. Louis.
Take the UN to Venezuela, guys. Have it up. Live it up. Just don't take your pets with you, because they won't last long.
Hey, honey, where was that country recently? I think it was in Africa. I can't remember the details. Maybe it was back a few years, where there was some big fight between two groups. They had a UN peacekeeping force. As soon as they decided this fight was serious, the UN peacekeepers ran for their lives.
Yeah, I remember, but I don't remember the countries.
But we'd have to.
Yeah, I remember that. I do remember that.
This happens frequently, including in the Middle East. The UN, unless, say, American or British, Australian, maybe a few other exceptional groups, unless those troops are a major part of it, the UN in most of its functions is weak.
Oh yeah, they never prevent any. The only thing the UN prevents is they stop war from working. The UN stops wars from working. There has to be a winner or a loser. If there's no winner and no loser, then it prolongs forever and it escalates till more and more people die, and nothing ever gets resolved, and there's tension throughout history. But they prevent war from working. That's all they do.
Well, and if the war is going to be bad and ugly, their troops are not strong enough or have no loyalty. And in some cases, UN troops have been known to steal from the areas they're supposed to be guarding and protecting.
Oh yeah, they're bad. Yeah, they don't have a good reputation. Did you hear that the Cook County Commissioner is calling for the UN to come into Chicago and help with all their all the shootings? They want the blue helmets in Chicago. I found this article this morning, and you can look him up. And you can get him probably on YouTube stating this fact that he wants the UN to come in because they have experience with keeping the peace. Wouldn't that be? It ain't gonna happen, but wouldn't that be something?
I think they wouldn't last 5 minutes.
Well, all I can say,
not in Chicago. They wouldn't.
They find the gangs, the drug gangs and the other gangs are well armed. Very well armed.
Send them to Gary, Indiana. They wouldn't make it out. They wouldn't make it out of there ever.
By the way, when people talk about drug gangs, the drug cartels in Mexico, I believe in the last year they're counting 22,000 casualties along the Mexican border or northern Mexico. That is big time war casualties. These drug cartels are powerful. They're like private armies raining down terror on the people of Mexico. And I guess the Mexican armed forces, I mean, they are a powerful force. And I realize they're a powerful force in the inner cities and some American cities too, but it's there. And, people don't take that stuff seriously, but drug gangs are something to fear.
Yep. And they're doing a lot to get the MS-13 cleaned out. They're really trying to clean some of this stuff up. It's only been a year. We'll see how it continues. And if there's prosperity in this country, that'll help just to having more prosperity with the lower taxes and more jobs and more corporations staying here. They're obviously going to need more workers, so that'll help. Just that alone over time will help to give people hope and probably less apt to turn to drugs to ease whatever they're feeling they're lacking, because they'll be able to make an honest living.
One more thing. The media, I've been reading stories and hearing stories in the media about the tax cut. The media is either they out and out lie, and there's a little bit of that, or they find one or two minor points in the tax cut to complain about, but all the good things like middle-class taxpayers getting, $1,200 less taxes next year, they skip those stories. And so the public has a very negative view of the tax cut. Like, for instance, saw this one story in St. Louis. It got a lot of coverage up there. A lady from a private college was complaining that the new tax plan, well, I'll put it in my language. In the past, heavy taxes were like a jackboot on the neck of taxpayers. And the only way they could get some of it off was to give to a nonprofit college like this lady's college. She said, well, this new tax plan gives so much personal mandate, less taxes without your having to necessarily give to charities or anything. You can still give to charities to get money off, but there's a lot less tax pressure to do so. And she says, people are going to give less because they're under the pressure. This is terrible. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. You mean to tell me people not being forced to almost look for tax loopholes like her charity is a bad thing? Also, people having more money of their own, they can still give to charity if they want to.
Right.
It's still a deductible item. And they played that up like, this is the horrible part of the tax plan. People won't be forced, by oppressive taxes to have to give to her college. I think, man, and yet that's how they played it. The press played it straight. It was like a terrible thing. I'm thinking, is anybody thinking this through?
That's an insult to her college. If her college can't stand on its own, because of what it does and what it benefits it has that people would want to give to it, that they need to be coerced into giving to her college, then that's an insult to her college. That's just stupid.
Yeah. If tax pressure is not so heavy that the only relief people can get is, stuff like hers, tax shelter, charitable giving, any pressure to relieve that off the taxpayers is a terrible thing because she'll get less money. Oh, wow. And I'm sure most people, when they heard that on TV, oh, yeah, it's a bad tax plan, less money for this nice little college. And the college does so much wonder for the people that graduates.
Wow. Wow.
I just think the lying of the media, at least they ought to balance it out and tell a lot of the good stuff. They should also say, well, it's tax breaks for the rich. Actually, now maybe indirectly you might say, well, if the whole business world does better, more jobs are created, that will help the rich indirectly because they probably have investments. But there is no, it's geared for middle class and lower people. There's very little tax break if you're a millionaire or above. I think there's none. Some people say there's some indirect stuff, but maybe that applies to almost anything. But it's geared to be a middle class tax cut, and the media won't tell people that.
No. Besides, they pay the most taxes, the rich. Why shouldn't they get the largest amount of a cut? Plus, the rising tide lifts all boats. And we went through this back if you were alive in the 80s, you know how successful this could be, maybe even much more so this time around. And the reason they're not telling us that, because they're scared to death. They know this is going to work. And with this, when this works, people don't need them. If you're making good money and life is good, you got a nice house, you're comfortable, you're looking at a nice fat 401k, and you're going to retire when you're 60, 65, doing pretty good, you don't need people in your life that are telling you you need them to do well. You don't need people in your life. You don't vote for people that are telling you you can't be anything or do anything without them, without big government, without handouts. You don't need them. So why would you vote for them? That's what they're scared about. They're scared this is actually going to do what it is designed to do, work.
You know what? I never worked for somebody who had less money than me.
Exactly.
I like it when my boss is making money because I can extort more out of him when I want my raise.
There you go. There you go. When our company does well, they give us bonuses, they give us more bonuses, they give us more money in our 401k. It's good for everybody all around. I don't know. People complain about that. To tell you what, send me your check. I'll take what your benefits are. I'll just take it and I'll do something more productive with it than you ever will.
Yeah, tax cuts for businesses is good for workers. And for business, and that's where jobs come from. That's why they call it the job and tax bill. But and even the deficit, normally when you have more economic activity, things turn over more and you actually get more tax revenue. That's what they're counting on. And it happened with the Kennedy tax cut and the Reagan tax cut. We'll see if it happens with the Trump tax cut and tax Reformation Act. Anyway, I've enjoyed the program this evening.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We want to thank everybody that joins in. We know our friends down in Trinidad and Tobago and Australia, Germany, and all over the world, and the United States and Canada. Of course, we thank you all for watching. We appreciate it. And we hope to see you back here next week. Do we have a schedule for next week, or is it going to be a surprise?
Well, we were discussing some possibilities. We might do again baptism for the dead, or we have the other side of hell argument. People not understanding that. Those are two possibilities that we're looking at. And what I wanted to do is talk to Ken about it. We didn't finish our discussion as to which one we need to do first. But all you all can email Ken your thoughts, and he could pass them on to me maybe tomorrow night or something, right, Ken?
Yep, be more than happy to. Anyway, again, we thank everyone. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your Sabbath, and we'll see you back here again next week. And let's see if I can get the intro going, and good night, everyone.
Good night, Dan.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.